Welcome you to our 10th session in the series Miami Urban Studies, Miami, Do You Love Me? This is the course for the FIU Doctor of Design program, a 2-year non-residential program that started this January. This is perhaps a little bit of a stretch to say that Cape Canaveral can be part of Miami Urban Studies. It's the other end of Florida, and it's certainly not very urban. And the places they fly to are decidedly not urban. But the reason why we are including the session is because there is a special interest among our DDES candidates in space exploration. And I'd say that Madhu Thangavelu is a good friend, but not only of myself, but also of the Digital Futures community, which has been taken part in a number of occasions before. So before introducing Madhu, let me just say a few words just by way of background. Well, first of all, I would say that I myself have an interest in this subject. This is an issue of architectural design, space architecture, the new frontier for design research, that was published in 2014. I received my copy when I was teaching at Harvard GSD on the very day that the Virgin Galactic test flight crashed off the in the desert, Mojave Desert. And since then, I would say that actually things have really begun to hot up. The issue of space architecture, of space exploration, has become a hot topic again. Almost every day, we are seeing developments on this particular frontier. Madhu and I should say, were collaborators on a couple of projects funded by NASA, NASA Innovative Advanced Concepts Fellowships, looking at the possibility of developing a robotic fabrication technology for printing structures on the Moon and Mars. And here you can see a version of contour crafting, printing a layered concrete made out of regolith from a hopper on an athlete vehicle. And in the background, you can see the solar collectors, you can see the regolith processing plant, and one of the parabolic structures that it's in the process of printing. The other key members of this team, well, the key member was Baruch Hoshnevis, who is the inventor of contour crafting, and also Anders Carlson, a structural engineer who worked with OMA on a number of buildings, and was also a colleague at USC at the time. They formed the full team. And we were looking not just at our own project, but of course other projects, including the Foster's project to develop a 3D printing technology for the moon, with Enrico Dini and another consortium, and a consortium from Europe, sponsored by the European Space Agency. And of course, since then things have moved on, and in a very positive way. There are a series of other ventures that have been exploring the possibility. This a structure for Mars that was composed of ice, which made a lot of sense because not only is Mars very cold, but also water and ice are good ways of providing shielding from radiation. One of the things that I came across during my research into space architecture and space exploration was really the way in which space was very much an extension of what was going on Earth. The famous kind of proclamation, "We choose to go to the moon" by JF Kennedy back in 1961, was has to be seen in the context of the Cold War. America had been severely embarrassed by Russia, who had been ahead of the States in many areas. Not only had they sent Sputnik into orbit, but also they'd sent the first person, the first cosmonaut into orbit ahead of any American astronaut. And this, of course, was in the context also of the Bay of Pigs. America needed to have a moment of prestige, and this was something that Kennedy set forth. And throughout the history, really, of space architecture, we can kind of see it in the context of that sort of context of matters on Earth. Here is Buzz Aldrin on the surface of the moon during the Apollo 11 mission. If ever you wondered why all the photographs are always of Buzz Aldrin, it's because there was only one camera, and that had been held by Neil Armstrong. But it's the way in which I think we can see space as a kind of reflection of matters on Earth is, I think, to my mind, was the most intriguing thing in many ways. The famous blue marble photograph of Earth, the first time that really we got a sense of what our planet looks like, an extraordinarily beautiful planet from outer space, that we began to realize how delicate the whole ecology of Earth was. And there have been a number of other significant changes since those early days, and that is the way in which we've seen a difference of operation, environmental in many ways, because spacecraft were no longer abandoned; they were reused. We had the space shuttle, and also we've seen a shift from the bigger organizations such as NASA towards entrepreneurs, figures like Richard Branson, Jeff Bezos, and of course Elon Musk coming in, whereby the big names are not so much the astronauts, the Neil Armstrongs and the Buzz Aldrins, but the entrepreneurs who are funding this enterprise. So it's been a shift from public funding towards private funding, from expendable aircraft to reusable aircraft. Another thing which is maybe of interest is you will probably recognize this image from the movie by Stanley Kubrick, 2001: A Space Odyssey. The extraordinarily, actually well-designed interiors of that sort of, and of course it was advised by the whole film was advised by NASA. The exquisite designs of the interiors in this particular vision of spacecraft. In fact, and here's Buzz Aldrin in the Eagle Lander, you can see that in fact it was anything but this kind of tidy interior. In fact, by the time we got to the International Space Station, it was a complete mess. Gone had been the kind of 1960s vision of sleek interiors. But interestingly, with the introduction of SpaceX, we're seeing in many ways a return to the idea of a design aesthetic, of the possibility of minimalism. And so too we're seeing a new world in which we are seeing the role of AI playing a crucial part in this new frontier. So today it's a great pleasure to be able to welcome my distinguished colleague and friend, Madhu Thangavelu, who was part of that astonishing project working for NASA. Madhu is from India originally. He's an architect. He trained at USC and MIT, and he's since gone on to become one of the leading figures, the pivotal figure, I'd say, in terms of space architecture worldwide. He is the author of a book, or co-author of a book about the moon, and is central to all investigations to do with space architecture. As I mentioned, he's taken part in 2 of the sessions we've had in Digital Futures on space architecture, and he's backed by popular demand, I should say. He's proved to be an extremely well appreciated figure. So I will stop sharing and hand over to Madhu and say welcome and thank you, Madhu, for getting up so early in the morning. It's 6 o'clock here on the west coast in California. Welcome, Madhu.
Good morning, Neil. Can you hear me well?
I can, yes.
Good. Oh, great. Thank you for the introduction. You laid out the fundamental premise for space architecture quite nicely. And let me bring up my slides here. How many of the students are on site in Florida, Neil?
Very, very few.
Very few. Okay.
I should say that our students are all over the world.
Okay.
We have one in Melbourne, Australia, several in China, one in Greece at the moment, and the rest are in the States.
Okay, great. So good morning to all of you from around the world. As Neil mentioned, my name is Madhu Thangavelu, and I teach at the School of Architecture and in the School of Engineering at USC. And Neil wanted me to come to you and talk to you about some of the happenings in the space world, particularly in the United States of America. And so with that, let me share some of my thoughts. They're not in any particular order, and my hope in this, in sharing these slides, is that you take with you some things, not only looking outward into space, but as you are students and practitioners of architecture, I want you to keep your mind open to how you could use this material for benefit in the world of architecture. With that, I would be remiss if I did not mention that USC has a very special interest in things astronautical, particularly in human spaceflight. And Neil Armstrong was a student of the school when he was assigned the task of the Apollo 11 mission. And the rumors that the Dean of Engineering told him that it'd be very easy for him to graduate as long as he gave us a report on the moon landing. So that's the rumor. Anyhow, we have a program and it's been growing. It's astronautical engineering as opposed to aerospace engineering. For those who don't know the difference between the two, aerospace engineering deals with atmospheric flight as well as aspects of space technologies. But astronautical engineering is mostly interested in activities beyond the atmosphere. So when the parameters change, we don't have the luxury of the atmosphere or gravity of Mother Earth. Things become very different. We have to relearn a lot of things, and that is what astronautical engineering is about. Within that school, within that department, I teach a course which is 3 units long, and the focus is really on imagination and creativity. I tell my students, and this is true in architecture too, school too, I'm not so much interested in in this particular class. I'm not interested in all the details. I'm very interested in new visions and new ideas. And I don't care if it's done on beach sand or on parchment, as long as it's an idea, you have a class and you have a grade, which is important. Originality is stressed, and as you know, Neil and all of us are in the academia, so we propose ideas that are quite independent of NASA or the aerospace community or the aerospace industry. And that is my class. I don't think Neil was in this class because this happened 2 years ago. And as you can see, the hero is standing there. He's a friend of our studio. Bus keeps a home in Florida, but spends a lot of time in Southern California, so I get to see him a lot. And this was a project we did. Oh, and you see right here, this is my thesis from my graduate school days in the School of Architecture. It had to do with building a spacecraft in orbit and landing them on the moon. And it's called Malio. You can Google it. In the School of Architecture, I enjoy teaching graduate students. And we have interesting students from all over the world, pretty much like all of you here now. And here you'll see a group of students from literally from around the globe who thought about what space activities could do for humanity in a direct manner. And many of them thought some of the technologies can be used for building for building our future cities. And the papers are available. I hope you Google them. So in the School of Architecture, we look at what our world would be like in 2050. We think we may have settlements on the moon and Mars, perhaps, and the implications for humanity on the globe is important. Is there a philosophy for a spacefaring civilization? Many times we miss the point when we don't ask why we do the things we do. And architects are usually up at the forefront when they ask that question, and hence space architecture. In space architecture, we are interested in space habitats, and they include the orbital, transit, and extraterrestrial vehicles and dwellings. The critical foremost importance in the design of such structures is providing for safety, shelter, and crew comfort to help in productivity for the people who we put in very precarious situations sometimes. It's very interdisciplinary, and that's what got me attracted in this in the first place. And architects know this. Architects are very interdisciplinary, and they are very synthesis-oriented people who are not shy to pick up the phone or call somebody who is an expert in a particular arena, and they get their impressions so that they can proceed with the synthesis of their product, which is usually a civil project, a building, or a structure. And in space architecture, we find that all the applied sciences and professions are involved. And I see that in my class. Participants in the class come from all walks of life. And you want to take a look at the archives to see what happens in the concept creation studio in the Department of Astronautical Engineering. Excuse me. That is our moon book. Neil mentioned that briefly. We are working on the third edition now. The first edition appeared before the turn of the century at 1999. The second edition appeared in 2007, and now it's been a long time. So we will be having something hopefully next year. As you mentioned, we have a good friend who is a constant visitor in our studio. He comes incognito because usually, as you know, he is an American hero. He commands an incredible honorarium if he is invited formally. But I've known Bus for close to many years, and he's a champion in many respects. And he wrote the foreword for this book. If you see our big cat walking around, that's because we are right in the way of his breakfast, and you'll see Sim walking around here. Right. Now, in my exchange with Neil, he asked the most interesting question. He asked, Madhu, why is the Cape Canaveral or that area, why is it located there? And I was going to tell him that he should read Jules Verne, who talks about flying to the moon from Florida. But the real reason for it is that when you launch from an equatorial region, which is around here, like so, you gain some energy because of the rotation of the Earth. And since the technology to go into orbit and beyond is rather new, and the energies we expend to get into orbit are so great, we try to use all the energies we can to combine to do this task. And so we launch from as close to the equator as possible to take advantage of the rotation of the Earth, so that as the rocket goes by, you're taking the rotation, the spin, plus the velocity of the rocket to get into orbit. And that is mainly the reason you will find most of the world's space ports are located in equatorial regions. Then Neil asked me to tell me a little more something about the Apollo project, and I thought the most appropriate thing, because Neil and I spar about the philosophy of artificial intelligence. It's a cliche term. It means a lot of things to a lot of people, particularly it's a very technical discipline for the engineers. It is a very abstract discipline in the philosophies and the humanities. So I thought I would open up my slides with the first idea, which is related to something that happened nearly just 2 weeks ago. And I thought I'd connect with you all about the importance and the limitations of artificial intelligence. Now, you're looking at the approach and landing of the Apollo 11 spacecraft in 1969. All of these things that happen outside of atmosphere happen without you don't see any wings because there is no use for them. All of it happens in a equal and opposite reaction kind of mechanism. And here you see the Apollo craft departing from the command vehicle, which is in orbit. And so the lander is separated and it's coming around, and it comes around, and it comes down pretty much like a rock without the aid of an atmosphere. And it's completely controlled by the propulsion system, which spews out the energies needed to brake and land. Power distance starts at about 50,000 feet, or about 300 miles away from the landing site, and comes down here. And at about 7,000 feet, the vehicle tilts over because of propulsion that is within the vehicle, and it comes down to touch down on the lunar surface. Now, Neil was told this is the interior of the Apollo Eagle lander. Neil and Buzz was the pilot, Neil was the commander. Neil was told that when you're flying down, your job is to just follow the instrumental landing system. And as you get closer and have visual acuity and visual observation and visual target observation of your landing site, if you see any difficulties, you must take over manually. So Neil and Buzz are flying down, and a minute before touchdown, Neil looks out the window and sees some boulders. I must backtrack and tell you that the vehicle is flying instrumentally with the inertial guiding system, which means that is operating using radar. And radar, as you know, is blind. The radar uses radio waves to communicate with the ground or the target. and then it connects us with the inertial guidance system, which already tells it exactly where it's going to land. And a radar cannot see little artifacts like boulders and rocks. That has to do with the wavelength at which it communicates. And so you're flying blind, as you do, using instrumental landing systems on aircraft. So it's nothing uncommon. But anyhow, that's how the vehicle flies, and it's carrying people. And so Buzz and Neil look out the window. Neil sees rocks, boulders, approaching boulders. So he took over, and of course, it was a protocol that he was supposed to do it. He did it, and there you see, you can see these triangular windows. So it's a very small window that they can look through. So they fly down and come down. Well, I should take this away from here just a minute. And there we go. Oh, can I? Great. So flies down, and you can hear this on their flight. They repeat the height, altitude, horizontal velocities, and in a matter of 4 or 5 nautical miles, they tilt over and touch down. So you'll hear them saying, we have a bunch of guys turning blue here and so on. That's the dialogue that goes on between mission control and the crew on the Eagle. But this was all entirely to protocol. Now, I mention that because in 1969, this was completely choreographed for humans in the loop. Enter the Perseverance rover and the landing of the entry, descent, and landing of that vehicle a few weeks ago, and it's turned the world upside down in how you fly your mission. You are looking at a robotic craft that is 200 million miles away from Earth. I mean, at this time, not so far, because Earth and Mars are in opposition, and the reason why we fly it at this time. Anyhow, if you look up at the sky, you can see Mars now. It's closest to us. Anyhow, this event is happening. The vehicle cannot be controlled from Earth because of the distance. I think at closest approach, it's 40 or 50 million miles away. And the reason is simple. The time lag for an electronic signal, electromagnetic signal to fly from Earth to the Moon to Mars is so long that you cannot control anything in real time. So the vehicle has to do the things that Neil and Buzz did by itself. So it did. What you're seeing here is the entry of the vehicle. Time is about 10 minutes to touchdown. It comes screeching down at 10 to 12,000 miles per hour, and it enters the very, very thin atmosphere of Mars. It does atmospheric braking. You start to see, the heat coming up. It's a fear re-entry. The parachute deploys. It's a supersonic deployment of parachute at the velocity of nearly 1,000 miles an hour. And the pull that you get back on it is quite hard. If you were on it, a crew would not survive. and then it deploys its heat shield. I want you to be watching the time in seconds. Tells you the parachute deploys 240 seconds before touchdown. The heat shield separates about 20 seconds later. And guess what? For the first time, um, the spacecraft opens its eyes. It literally opens its optical eyes, and cameras are looking down to um, the surface. This is the first time we have done this before, but this is the first time we have done this on Mars. The camera looks down, it looks at the site, compares it with high resolution imagery that is stored on deck, and matches it to see where exactly is the landing spot. It gets the match in a matter of seconds, and you have a radar lock that allows you to zoom in further to the landing area. And then what's called the terrain takes over, the terrain relative navigation solution. You're really looking at it as you would with the human brain. You're seeing something and you're targeting an area, and it has been told, as Neil and Buzz were told, if you see any rocks, avoid it during your landing. And that is exactly what Perseverance rover did. The only difference is that it was able to do this in a matter of seconds, what Neil and Buzz were trained to do over tens of years. So the flight comes along, terrain relative navigation solution takes over. In a matter of seconds, it is able to tell exactly where it's going to touch down. It takes away all the rocks on site, looks for a smooth landing area, and plunk, it puts it down. You have the sky crane come down and drop it, and it worked like a dream. For some people, um, this is excitement at the highest level. You know, all of us, our hearts are pounding because we want to see this happen very nicely. But for some other people, this is scary as hell because it tells you what machines can do and how accurately they can do it, how much precision is involved, and it can be scary for other reasons. So here you see, I hope you will look up the paper on it, which is just published. You'll see the vehicle, how it comes down, and see the times required. It's, it's a very short ordered time in which all of these things happen, but this is part of machine intelligence and machine learning. The vehicle comes around, looks for landmark matches, then switches on to some software. Um, EKF stands for Enhanced Kalman Filter. There are many routines that we use in space flight that deal with checking the vehicle to see exactly where it is. And this is one of them. IMU, the inertial maneuvering unit. They're all engaged. And before you know it, you have a precision landing on target. So this is what artificial intelligence can do for you now. Many of the systems involved are very, very small, the physical size. Cameras are very small. This is probably the most important camera on site. It had dozens of cameras on the vehicle, and that is the vehicle that was plump put down on the surface. That is Perseverance rover at JPL. Going through all of those cameras are located in the various parts. Again, that is the vehicle getting ready for flight. And that is the mast cam, and the sharpest image delivered through this, plus It has an assortment of tools that allow you to do a lot of geological work. This is the power system, radioactive radioactive thermal generator, more cameras, the sample retrieval system, which is part of the vehicle for a future project to return Martian samples back to Earth. And that is the microphone. In case you've not heard sounds from Mars, I hope you will go to the JPL site and pull up the sounds of Mars. And also, a few days ago, the sound of the rover moving on the Martian surface. So in essence, artificial intelligence is an extension of the human sensibilities, senses, and we then somehow transport ourselves to the location. You can see how small this microphone is. It's a tiny little thing, and this is how tools of an electronic nature are now being employed not only in the space industry, but very widely across disciplines in the industry and in government. To give you a rough idea of how good this particular mass cam camera is in catching imagery, that is a long shot on the top, and if you took a little spot over there, you can see the high resolution quality of the images. So we have some excellent cameras on board. Now, so this gives you a rough idea of what artificial intelligence is capable of. It's machine learning at its best. We have employed this for many years in terms of many simulations we do, but now we have gotten very, very good because of the processor speeds and the way we use code to make things happen. We've used artificial intelligence in banking, and it is used in marketing widely now, because every time you go shop for something, your profile is in data, not by a human, but by an artificial intelligence agent that tells you what exactly you are about and what you would like next. And this is why many times when you go on your computer screen, you see things that you wonder how they knew. There is no need to have a person in the loop, because your AI agent knows what it is you're looking for. So marketing uses it. Hiring of people with particular skills, they use it in the industry, in various industries. One of the interesting things about YouTube, which all of you are familiar with, is YouTube uses some of the most advanced artificial intelligence to snag you to stay on screen. I enjoy music, so I go on YouTube to pull out old music, the good music, as Neil and I would say, from the Beatles period of time and the American versions of 1970s and 80s. Sorry to embarrass the younger generation, but we love good music. So YouTube uses it to seduce me to pick out songs that I may not have heard for many years. And it's beautiful because I get stuck on YouTube, and sometimes I can spend hours listening to music that I had not heard for a long time. Medicine, as you know, has used artificial intelligence for a very long time. They used to call it expert systems. That is, if the doctor is not in, can you look up my radiology and tell me what's wrong? And I had an exchange with one of your students, and she too brought up the idea of radiology, because in medicine, most of your work is done by sight seeing the patient, seeing the slide, seeing the pathological problems in a microscope. And much of that can be put into an artificial intelligence agent. And we call it expert systems. We've had that for many years, particularly in radiology. And so medicine uses it. And now design is starting to use it. And so artificial intelligence is here to stay. Again, I do not think that term is correct. We are always looking for a better term. It's an assistant. It's an assistant, an intelligence assistant. It helps you to increase your speed of iteration. This is our moon book, and as I mentioned, Buzz Aldrin wrote the foreword for it. In it, we say concepts are important because it allows the planners and the thinkers about projects to look at a variety of options. And it's very important for humans to do that, because whenever you engage in an endeavor, the most important thing you do is, what are your choices? And the more choices you have, the better you would pick a good choice. In many ways, humans are choice makers. And artificial intelligence can be very helpful in making choices, particularly when there are hundreds and thousands of choices to make that we don't have the time to make it. So artificial intelligence is good. Now I'm switching over to some of the vehicular ideas and so on. And the reason you see Mies van der Rohe in here is because he did something that we don't do in government and in the industry, So the story is that Mies was the final director of the Bauhaus during the Nazi period. And he was begging the administration for more funds to do the work that he was doing. But the Nazi regime under Albert Speer had other ideas about how architecture must look like. So finally, Herr Hitler gave him a little bit of money and said, yes, we know about the Bauhaus. It's a great school. We need to give you some money. He gave him a paltry sum of money. So me set up a fantastic dinner for the faculty with the best menu, and and flew off to the US and said, if you don't have the money, that's the best I can do for you. But unfortunately, in the US, when you don't have enough money for building spacecraft, we still struggle and try to make different kinds of ideas and so on. And this is why things take very, very long time to do. Money can be distributed over large numbers of constituencies, and it is one big mess. Now, we know that the International Space Station is finally now open to new ideas, and soon we will be seeing more structures added to it to make for the new generation of private space entrepreneurs. There is a company called Axiom, and they're hoping that they will add some modules to space station so that people can fly there and open up a whole new industry called space tours. So I got involved in those kinds of ideas of doing large spacecraft and what we might be able to do, and do artificial gravity and so on. And before you know it, we are in the current era. Private spacecraft have come into the industry, particularly in Southern California. Right across the street from here, a few miles down, is where these things are built. and Elon Musk is the chief executive, and Gwen lives over here, the president of the company, and we are building the most beautiful new generation of rockets. Um, there is nothing to compare them with because these are mostly reusable vehicles. They've started to reuse the first stage. The rocket started small, they got bigger, and as you can see here, you see the hypersonic fins. It suggests that you can return the first stage back to the landing site. Now we are able to return also the fairings, and we are only left with finding a way to return the second stage, and that too will be done shortly. More recently, a crew vehicle was developed called the Dragon, and it is a beautiful vehicle to see. It would be compared to the finest flying vehicles anywhere in the world. Again, much of it controlled by artificial intelligence. And of course, the largest of them is called the Falcon Heavy. And that too, this is the vehicle that put Elon Musk's Tesla Roadster into Mars orbit. And now several new ideas, several new missions are awaiting it. That's the SpaceX Crew Dragon. And welcome to the 21st century of human spaceflight. The interior is spectacular. Again, architects need to know this because these things are designed by industrial designers. They have conceptual understanding similar to architects. And here you see the seating arrangement. I believe that we can go up to 7 or maybe close to 10. Here you see 7 seating arrangements, and that is the input board. Everything is on touch screen. So the astronauts of the past era had to relearn how to do touch screen just as you would on an Apple iPad. Here you see Bob, Benkin, and Doug getting ready for their first flight. Again, an experience that is unlike anything that we saw in the Apollo or the space shuttle era. Here you see a stack of people getting ready for the next flight. They are already training to get ready to do their thing. And space station is going to be quite a busy place for the coming years. Again, it's autonomous docking, artificial intelligence at work, Dragon literally talking to the station, and crew are probably just keeping their thumbs together and waiting for the docking. And now we have a private space looking at other options beyond Earth orbit to go to the moon and Mars. And here you see competing designs for landing on the moon. And right now, as I speak, I'm seeing traffic on my email about what each of these people, each of these companies are doing. And it's quite an exciting time for architects to be involved in conceptual design for particular systems in these vehicles. That would be the idea for SpaceX landing on Mars. Now, a thing or two about landing on Mars. This is the idea from SpaceX to create a city on Mars. But when you study Mars, you will realize that it may not look like that at all, because Mars has a variety of environmental constraints that do not allow you to do what you do on planet Earth. So it's our opinion that habitats on Mars would mostly be underground to avoid the harsh conditions on the surface that include radiation, micrometeorites, we have to keep our crew safe. Well, one way to do that is to go underground. Now, to keep competition going, SpaceX is not the only vendor. Blue Origin, a company set up by Jeff Bezos. And to give you an idea, we are talking about the two wealthiest people on planet Earth, Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk. So they're competing with each other to create a most affordable and most useful form of space transportation. This is Blue Origin's capsule, and they want to do short suborbital flights first to let people experience the ride. That's one module being built. That's the interior design for such a vehicle to experience suborbital spaceflight. So we have vehicles that are fully reusable vehicles, and more and more vehicles will come on between this year and the next. You will see some very interesting developments. And of course, everybody is talking about the Starship, which is probably the biggest vehicle ever designed to go into space. There's one sitting on Elon's launch pad now, Starship number 11, and it may fly out for their test in the coming days. So it's a very exciting time. And the reason they are accelerating this is because a person from Japan has put in a very large sum, assigned SpaceX to fly him and his friends around the moon and back in a project called Dear Moon. If you've not Googled it, you must look at it to see what it is about. This is how architects draw trajectory plans for a lunar mission. And you see exactly what happens during different periods of the time. This is the launch pad for the private enterprise of Elon Musk in Boca Chica, which is just across from just in the Gulf of Mexico area. And it is seeing a lot of activity. What used to be a sleepy village is now taken over by SpaceX. That is an image from a drone recently that shows you what is happening there. Heavy building activities. Again, architects are needed to do work in this area. As I said, very large rockets are coming. The theory, the principles, and the engineering allow very large rockets to be built, particularly with new materials that allow us to do that. These are some of our ideas on what we could do with large vehicles. I myself am very much attracted towards the moon, and our studies mostly are on the moon, but now we are looking towards Mars too. Interesting things we can do in low gravity include even astronauts walking on very tall stilts, on pneumatic stilts that can go very tall. When I proposed this idea, I was pulled into a group meeting in the corridor and said, "Madhu, you must be crazy." But you know what? Humans are crazy. We do wonderful things, and we want to do them outside of planet Earth. On this side, you see large sails that reflect solar light and bounce it back to the ground, where in the polar regions where the sunlight comes in horizontal, you're able to shine light on the surface. There are many ideas like that, and here in Southern California is where some of these things are being built. Hesperia is in the high desert up north, about 2 hours from here. We are building structures using soil. We call it in situ resource utilization, and it's a method so that that allows you to build large structures without carrying the material from Earth to your extraterrestrial destination, but using materials that are already there. Here you see Nader. He is no more, but his children run the show, and I happen to I happen to be the willing victim to wear the spacesuit on a very hot summer day, and the environmental control system on the spacesuit failed. And when I came out, my socks were soaking wet with sweat. So what would a Mars base look like? These are the kind of ideas that we generate in our studio. Very rudimentary, but it's an idea. And we develop that over a few weeks' time. And then over the course of the year, we refine it outside of the classroom. We want eventually to have public transportation on the moon and Mars. We want to be able to take people from place to place on extraterrestrial surfaces. And we want to generate energy using things like flywheels and so on. We have many different ideas about what we could do on extraterrestrial surfaces, including quarantines for bringing samples from various places, checking them out before we are sure that we can bring them to Earth. We can do mining. And of course, a new idea, it's not a new idea anymore. This was presented to President Clinton in the year 1999, when I told him we could have the first US presidential library on the moon. He was kind enough to send me a handwritten letter. So there are wonderful things we can do about space. And, I have ideas for what we could do on the moon, and how we could have rehabilitation facilities and enjoyment areas, and perhaps Olympics on the moon. This last year, we've been looking at what the White House has done in the last 4 years to extend the ideas further and I'm glad to report that the new administration is holding NASA Artemis and the Artemis Accords, and they want to continue the good work that was done by our most radical last administration. This is the mission that was developed at the USC School of Architecture and the School of Engineering to send people off to the Mars. It's an award-winning design, but unfortunately, it may not be the way we would do that, but we are able to show different kinds of concepts. Again, that's our book. That's our good friend signing our book for me. I love to draw. I'm sure all of you do too. And these are some of our earlier drawings and our ideas for orbiting stations and astronaut vehicles. Neil, how are we doing on time?
We're fine. We're fine. Please keep going as you wish.
Okay. Some daring methods to have landers on the moon and Mars. We realized that spacesuits can carry people upwards of 10 hours. So a landing from orbit to the lunar surface, it takes only minutes. So then we ask the question, why do we need a cabin? We can fly people in their spacesuits, get them to do their work on the ground and fly them back to orbit. These are some of the new vehicles that NASA has planned. This one's called a Centaur. It uses the Robonaut attachment. Again, and the cliche term artificial intelligence come to play. But in this particular case, it's more collaborative robotics. Google the term. It's a co-robot, which means this robot is an avatar of a human at the control room who pretty much engages, is attached to this robot, and when he or she moves around, the robot does the same. they come in humanoid shapes and forms, and there's one on station now, and it's being trained to do assist activities. The big difference is there is no workers' compensation, there is no insurance, and guess what? There is no pre-breathing or wearing a spacesuit. This robot can go out of the International Space Station and do things for you for free. And it does not complain. I'm glad that Neil brought up this idea. I recall Neil and all of us are working on it. The idea is, again, to use um, what is available to you on the moon or Mars. You scoop materials and put it into this hopper here, and then extrude it down and build structures. And it is an area that where we think there is tremendous promise because humans at the end of the day are not built to be outside of the cocoon of planet Earth for reasons of gravity, radiation, micrometeorites, all of which are threatening to kill you every moment. This is the good work of Professor Koshnevish. And now we are starting to see other companies building structures all over the world. NASA has offered a company called Icon. Google them. Jason Ballard is the CEO. He's already building homes in Mexico. I believe he has already built 1,000 homes using 3D printing, and it is happening in the U.S., in Russia. There is a company called um, Hesperia, I think. You want to Google them. We think that landing pads and so on can be built using robots. And this is my rendition for a lunar landing pad on the South Polar region. I mentioned we can continue to build structures to let the public enjoy extraterrestrial places like the moon and Mars. My favorite idea, and that of our co-author, is to have a train ride on the moon or Mars. And one of the difficulties in accessing extraterrestrial surface that does not have an atmosphere is that micrometeorites can come and impact the surface. Shooting stars don't happen on the moon and Mars because the atmosphere is so thin, and on the moon it's absent. So we think we should use high power lasers to shoot them down as they come towards you. And it's a thought that's interesting because we think we can do planetary defense on Earth also using high power lasers. Our rendition for a lunar humanities nexus, where we think that the United Nations would have their facilities there, along with a retirement complex and a memorial area, and various other interesting facilities for people to visit. This is a rendition from Cal Poly Obispo of what an Olympics might look like on the moon. And this was a drawing we did for Clinton administration about a presidential archive on the moon. Now I want to show you where we are as I mentioned, everything is happening at glacial speed in the government. This is a drawing from 1960s. There was a time when NASA employed artists who painted with watercolors and watercolors and oils, and they would draw beautiful, sensitive drawings about what the future of spacecraft and space might be. There is a a archive, a blog put out by David Potry. You want to Google it to see all those beautiful images from the 1960s. Here you see that in the 1960s, we developed nuclear propulsion. We built the rockets and we tested them, and they worked. And now, come February 2021, and NASA is again thinking nuclear rocket ships. And the reason is simple, because we think we can go from Earth to Mars in a matter of days rather than months, weeks, and months. And in my opinion, that is exactly the way we should do this, instead of subjecting humans to months and months of torture. A little bit about Mars. Mars is an interesting place. And that is kind of the real color of Mars. When you drill in and you pull the stuff out, there's a grayish color. It has a very thin carbon dioxide atmosphere, about 1% the density of Earth, and it's pure, mostly pure carbon dioxide, toxic, unbreathable. You're looking at Mons, Olympus Mons, the largest volcanic structure in our solar system. It is so tall that the top of it sticks outside into space. Literally, the carbon dioxide atmosphere grazes through about here, and all of this area is sticking out right into space. A beautiful geological artifact that I think people would love to see. That it's a very big structure. It's to give you a rough idea how big it is. Now, we also, in the past, recent past, have been focusing very high resolution cameras to see that there are cavities on extraterrestrial bodies, including the Moon and Mars. And we think they are formed by lava tubes that are then impacted by meteorites, exposing breaches in the roof that we call skylights. And here you see one on Mars. We think these kinds of things are important because if we can set up habitats inside of these lava tubes, we can, we may be cavemen, but cave folks know how to live and survive the dangerous conditions that exist on the surface. And so this is a new thinking that's happening for both the Moon and Mars to build your habitats underground. And of course, Mars has the Valles Marineris, which is a canyon system, which is much, much bigger than anything that we have. Grand Canyon and so on are completely dwarfed by Valles Marineris. To give you how big the Valles Marineris is, it pretty much extends the whole United States. We are starting to get some very good data on what the structure of the innards of Mars look like. It appears to be sedimentary conditions, sedimentary rock formations. Between lava tubes and canyons, there may be very interesting places for architects to do some designs. You have to study lava tubes to know how they work. And if you've not been in one, I would strongly recommend it. You don't have to go to Hawaii. There are lava tubes here, not too far from here. You take a look at them. And NASA is still contemplating going to Mars. Different ways. I mean, these are earlier images. Things may take a different turn now that nuclear rocket ships are back into business. And what are we doing on the Earth to help with these missions? We have simulators. Now, Bob Zubrin and others have what do you call it, the Mars Desert Research Simulators. Hank Rogers in Hawaii has been putting up a simulator in the Mauna Lea. That's the Mauna Kea Observatory there, and there's the Mauna Lea. and we were there some time ago wondering if we could use this same simulator for lunar missions. Of course, you all know the Antarctica is a place where we have analogs, where we study how people behave in small groups for extended lengths of time in remote regions. And this is how a base looks like on in the Antarctica. The UK has an incredible, the Halley base is over there. This is the McMurdo station. This is how we expect a colony, or colony is a bad word, a settlement would evolve in an extraterrestrial surface, comparable to what we do in the Antarctica now. That's what it looks like in the Antarctica during a day. And as you know, we got 6 months of shallow sunlight, followed by winter over when you don't see the sun at all. These are interesting experiences for people who are interested in doing things. Here in Las Vegas, there is a plan to build Mars simulators by our friend John Spencer. Neil, do you know John?
Yes, he came to give us a lecture at USC when we did our
That's right.
space
That's
studio.
right. Yes, you're right.
He's a
Yes,
space tourism man. Well,
that is correct. John is working on it. That's the interior of such a facility, where he wants to show an entire dome that looks like Martian sky, and then a habitat area inside here with a rover that can go around, so people who come in can go in there. And then, of course, in the middle is the casino. So the project is being studied both here and in Shanghai, I'm told, Neil. So you may want to follow up on that. This is a habitat that we visited, NASA's project in the desert in Arizona. If you Google it, you'll see the lava flow, the black lava flow in north of Flagstaff. We went there to see how you would put up a habitat along with rovers and to study how people can live for extended periods of time. And there you see us with our friends. And next week, we will have the AIAA talk on some of these materials. You see Baroque here. Chris Kennedy will be talking to us, and maybe Scott. And do you see Anders there, Neil?
Yeah, I wasn't allowed to go on that trip because I'm a British passport holder.
Oh, that's right. I remember that. Yes. Sorry for that, but it was a great event on that time. Yeah. So we had a lot of things happening, and we are building new structures and designing new ways to continue to progress this idea of extending human horizons beyond planet Earth. Interior of the habitat, console for operations, and so here you see the rover in action. That is the athlete transporter over here. And lightweight cranes that can do extensive work that you can set up at short notice. Here you see the inventor. Some work that is done at USC, including inflatables. And this was a very early work. Many years before you came on board, Neil, we were studying lunar HAB ideas in the School of Architecture, orbiting facilities. And in 2010, we had the Boston, city of Boston had a contest for what they called the Moon Capital. And an architect who was trained particularly in illustration by the name of Tom Schmidt, who lives in Hong Kong, won the first place. I had a great interest in Tom. I keep in touch with him, and Tom presented at the last architecture gathering, and so you can go up and see his works. It's on the AIAA archives as well as YouTube. And he pretty much looked at it from an architectural point of view to how put modular structures together to build a lunar base. Coming to spacesuits, so we have many people competing to design different kinds of spacesuits, all the way from mechanical counterpressure suits that follow the body contours and use skin pressure to hold your fluids intact, all the way to hybrids and including hard suits. I think you're familiar with hard suits because divers use them. The good thing about hard suits is that you can pressurize them to cabin pressure. And so when you move from the cabin or from the habitat to the exterior surface, you don't have to pre-breathe and purge your nitrogens and so on. So it can be a very quick transition. And NASA is looking at that. Some other suits. A lot of studies go on into spacesuit design. Elon, you will know, mentions that spacesuit design was the hardest part for him to do, but they have some ideas on how to go about it. Yours truly in a spacesuit, and that is Deva Newman. Deva Newman is a space architect and professor of astronautics at MIT. And this year, in January, she is now the director of the Media Lab. So architects, I welcome you to engage people like Deva and her partner, Guy Traudy, who was my teacher in space architecture, who is from Houston, but now lives in MIT with Deva. And of course, we would all love to wear these kinds of suits and walk around for Halloween. There is much to be studied in how to make humans comfortable in an external environment. And there is a vein of thought now that says that we should move away from spacesuits and engage artificial intelligence within the body of a pressurized compartment that you will call a one-person spacecraft, single-person spacecraft, SPS. Google it. Brand Griffin has been pushing for a demonstration on International Space Station, and he delivered some talks. You may want to get him to talk to you, Neil. Talk to the studio. My favorite suit of all time still remains the Gemini G2 spacesuit that you see here being posed by none other than Neil Armstrong on his Gemini flight. And of course, I also like the suit, the A7S, AL7S, the Apollo suit that Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong wore. Designing for the human figure is not as easy as you think. And some of the areas that we don't pay attention to, particularly for me, this area is the crotch is very interesting because just like the sumo wrestler, the design of the crotch is very important for mobility. In this particular design, this was called the beaver tail. After you put on the suit, you would clip it on so that you could move your legs around. Things like that are not paid attention to, and we need to be thinking in terms of new designs. I looked at artificial gravity early on and studied the possibility of using the space shuttle. During the 90s, we were already thinking about space shuttle retirement. It had already been 10 years, and we thought by the end of 20 years, shuttle would be retired. So I thought one of the later missions would be to put shuttle into a spinning orbit with an external tank attached to it. And we studied the idea of integrating lunar bases in orbit. And now we have introduced a Dragon that can fly people over. They will stay on the station and build structures on the moon. This is my rendition for Rockwell International. Again, it's very interesting how we work. A design takes about a year to perform and study. In this particular instance, the presentation was made to the manager, after which we met over at coffee, and he pulled me aside and said, I like your design, but that the space shuttle is a national asset, and we cannot put it through stunts like these. I was surprised, but there are many, many policy factors that go into design. Yeah, I mean, architects do this too in civilian projects and civil projects. So that was my idea. And artificial gravity or simulated gravity is an interesting thought, but it comes with tremendous difficulties in the management of fluids, management of masses. So engineers are not quite keen on this. This is a project that I worked with on bus. The idea was to spin this whole vehicle around. And these are the communication platforms, free flyers. But again, we worry that spinning vehicles. I just mentioned this yesterday. There is a big difference between gravity and simulated gravity. Gravity pulls you inwards. So if you lose something, it falls inwards to the ground in the case of the Earth or the Moon or Mars. In a spinning structure, if you lose something, it flies out. It is not gravity. It is a simulation of something that allows you to stay stuck to a surface through centrifugal force. So it's a very big difference that architects may realize, because when you're particularly dealing with tools and using it to build something, if you lose something, it is going to create a mess. It's going to litter space, and it is something that you need to be really thinking about. In terms of radiation, we are starting to think about radiation in a very important way. Here you see, suits you can wear. They are testing it out on international, and is being used by radiation workers on Earth to clean up radiation debris, including Fukushima and so on. A little bit of space philosophy to end our talk. I suppose we are still on time, Neil?
Yeah, we should perhaps wrap things up so we can leave some time for some questions, but this is fascinating.
Oh, great. Here you go. This would be a good ending to do this. We are all asking about the reason why we do this thing, go out into space. Is it for science or is it for humanities? Architects know better. We know it's for both. Is it man or machine? We know better. We know it is both. Big or small, the tendency right now is again in both directions. We have very small agents like satellites and microsatellites and satellites, and we have very large vehicles like the Starliner. Architects are the people who need to provide the vision. You're looking at our good friend Freeman Dyson, who is a native, who recently passed. But he thinks we are looking out into the blackness of space, and we should really be out there beautifying it. All of us think of Buckminster Fuller as the father of space space architecture. He is the person who coined the term space architecture, and these are the heroes, recent heroes. They also happen to be the richest people on planet Earth. Musk thinks we should settle other planets as an insurance for human survival. Bezos thinks we should go out into space so that we make Earth more beautiful and keep it safe from all the industrial activities, and that is messing up. John Marburger, who used to be the dean of arts and letters, science, arts and letters at USC, he went on to become George Bush science advisor, the senior George Bush science advisor. And he brought up the idea that the reason we go into space is to expand our economic sphere of influence. And that is why we talk about solar beaming, solar energy from space, and so on. Joseph Campbell, the mentor for George Lucas in the Star Wars arena, talks about going out, exploring, and coming back to tell the story. He calls it the return of the hero. Freeman Dyson, as I mentioned, wants us all to get out and beautify the universe. Frank White is a philosopher who thinks that if we go out into space and come back, you become a different person because you see Earth as a living, a fragile organism in which we are just tiny participants. And most recently, in the past few years, there's a voice coming out from a group called For All Moonkind, which says that preservation of species, cultural heritage outside of Earth is an imperative. Otherwise, our civilization does not have a meaning. Most great civilizations preserve their heritage, and we should do the same for us. Now, Jim Lovelock thinks that climate change is a big problem. We need to do something about it, and adaptation is the way to go. Arthur Clarke says the way to do this is to get out there, push the boundaries, and see how far we can go. Carl Sagan thinks that it is by discussion of ideas between creativity and skepticism that we make the most incredible discoveries. I think we should go do some of these things to remember who we are. Nostalgia is an important part of human condition. I presented some papers that you want to take a look at, how we think space architecture can be used for architecture in civil world. Agriculture is taking a very big step forward in vertical farming. Already Google has permeated the entire world, percolating into every segment of society. And you can see the servers multiplying over the years. Satellite communications are coming to your home, even if you don't like it. Elon Musk is putting them up, and astronomers are, they are shouting that they can't see the skies anymore. Telemedicine is happening. People are looking up, and doctors don't need to come home and make house calls. They can prescribe medications directly by telemedicine. Surgery is happening right now, and the finesse with which it is done, humans cannot do that. Artificial intelligence is involved. Cities can grow downwards. We've been going up, we've gone very high, we can go downwards. It's two papers that we wrote that's now looking at doing more things, underground activities. We know how to do large scale mining. We know how to bring daylight into places and virtual reality into places in dark spaces. Flight, we are having people going around the world, and in a matter of hours, and now it'll be a matter of minutes before we can commute around the world. Take a look at some of these ideas that were presented, and most of all, I like to think there is a spiritual aspect to all of these things that we do. And this was an idea for a cathedral on the moon that was proposed in a competition that was held. And one of my favorite books is The Canticle of the Sun. If you've not read it, you want to read it, because in every scripture, in every great religion, they all look up to the sun and the moon and the stars. So with that, I will end. Please take a look at Eric Wernquist, The Wanderers, when you have a time. I'm able to play it for you, but I think we should go into discussion mode now. Is that good, Neil?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, Madhu, thank you so
Okay.
much. It's Absolutely fascinating, mesmerizing. I know that we've got lots of questions. I want to start and jump in there quickly and just say, I mean, one thing I've noticed since we were collaborating, I remember trying to get a second space studio at USC, and they kind of marginalized it and said, no, it's not really relevant to architects and so on. But actually, since then, one thing that has really impressed me has been the incredible interest in space architecture in the architectural community. I mean, the students are absolutely fascinated by it, and there'll be a lot of developments. But one thing I just want to ask you, in objective terms, how could you? I mean, there seems to be so much more interest in space right now than there was, let's say, 6, 10 years ago. And maybe it's because of the lockdown and we want to go explore distant places. Mm-hmm. But my question is, in objective terms, could you quantify how much more activity there is now? Because literally every single day we read about Elon Musk and SpaceX doing something new. Could you say that could you actually measure how much more activity and interest there is right now than there was, say, that's 10 years ago?
I have not quantified it, Neil, but you're absolutely right. There is not a single day when I don't get my email inbox full of queries about space architecture. And I believe it is the private space sector that is doing it, because many of our students in the astronautical engineering department tend to find jobs in the private sector. And they are very, very interested because they see the dynamism of things happening. The Starship is an example of how every week a new Starship is taking flight, and they are advancing so fast. The cadence is somehow relating to people pursuing this interest in space architecture as well. It's a good thought to think about why that is happening, but I think probably because the door is opening to other venues besides the very narrow trend or the very narrow expertise that NASA seeks.
Okay, this is the Starship. What I must say, the size of it. I don't know how many people it takes, but one thing that also struck me was that the way, in a strange way, the new SpaceX rockets look almost crude by comparison, like almost designed by a child. But they're much more chunky, and I don't know what the logic is behind that. Presumably, the control is done by AI these days, so you don't worry much about the. I don't know, but it seems like we're in an absolutely new, a threshold of something new happening for sure.
This is very true. Again, I wouldn't use artificial intelligence as much as machine learning. I think you may recall in the 1960s, there was very stiff competition between the Russians and the US to mount the Lunar manned program. The Russians came very close to beating the US to do this, except they had a problem. They did not have powerful engines. So the engine designer made it very obvious to Korolov, the chief, that we don't need powerful engines. We can cluster them together. We can cluster smaller engines together. I can give you as many engines you need. And that is why the N1 took that look. It had 36 or 30, many engines stuck on it, but they had a problem. They didn't know how to control it. And now, agility of the AI system allows you to control very, very accurately each of those 36 engines or so that Elon wants put on the first stage of the Starship. So you are right. Our understanding and the swiftness with which we move in the control laws arena is allowing us to do things that were impossible 20, 30, or 50 years ago.
Madhu, this is fantastic. I want to open up from questions from our DDES candidates. So I know there are a number of individuals who've got a particular interest in. So let me start with Marina, who I know has got a particular fascination with Russian cosmonauts and the Russian space industry. Marina, would you like to ask a question?
Yes, hello, Madhu. It was a beautiful presentation, and it's so nice to listen to you again. I saw you in the Digital Futures event in space architecture, and yes, I'm a fan since I was a child of astronauts and space architecture. I believe that there is something like between like kind of imaginary that make us think as designers, like new or future cities, and it opened our imagination in several ways. And I was listening that you define the astronautical engineer like beyond the atmosphere, and I'm interested in this kind of territorial scale that has the architecture that in a way, for example, specifically in Cape Canaveral that we were talking about. And I was before the lecture, I've been reading articles and seeing maps, and also through Google Maps and so on. And something that you mentioned as well, in terms that there is like a specific location related with the rotation of the Earth to take advantage of this, and also it has to be close to the ocean in case of accidents and so on. And I was paying attention that when you see the architectural organization of the station, you have like all these points around the coast where it's like a kind of I mean, I was thinking about what kind of landscape we build with this Space Force station related with the coast. And I was thinking like it's like a kind of infrastructural synthetic landscape in terms of what you see with all these points, and you was mentioned in terms of scale as well. So I wanted to ask you as a designer and as a like from certain artistical sensitivity as well that you showed today, what do you think that is the beauty of this kind of development, or this kind of, if we can talk about like a kind of landscape in terms of the design, and how do you think that this coexists with the habitants of the place? Because there is like a kind of touristic as well industry behind all this. So yeah, that's my question. This is a double question, but what do you think that is the beauty of this kind of landscape, special landscape in the Earth, and yeah, and how we interact?
You're giving me some ideas now, Marina. I think you are targeting the spaceports and the design of them. If you are in the Kennedy Space Center area, you want to talk with Susie Cunningham. And she has been managing a lot of things. She's a magical woman, because I have no idea how she is able to manage all this, but she has been in charge of all the new commercial developments for launch pads. And if I were you, I would go there and tell Susie, I want to really explore underground developments for that area, because more and more, Marina, I'm starting to think that we have a third dimension that we can explore for architecture without messing up the surface landscape, particularly because nature has been giving us a message in these past few decades that she is not happy with what we do on the surface or on the atmosphere. And we look at particularly that coast gets whacked by hurricanes, and it brings everything to a standstill. And every other year, millions of dollars are spent refurbishing things that we built and put up. So if we go underground, we can use space technologies to live and to operate, during our work and business hours very nicely. This is not new. For years, we have become very good at building and operating underground facilities. We have done that in Greenland. We have done that during the war. I think Neil will tell you how much activities happened underground London during the V2 bombardment. And the Germans built all their rockets underground. And now mining towns operate underground. There's a place called Coober Pedy in Australia where thousands of people live underground and do mining. And I think we need a new refined sensitivity of how we appreciate and nurture the surface of Mother Earth. Um, the native Indians had that idea of how to do that. We should probably rethink that too. Hope I gave you some ideas. Okay, Neil, did you have a question?
I've got further questions, but maybe let's see who else has a question. Yeah, but maybe one thing, Madhu. I know that you're very much for a moon person rather than Mars person, and I mean, what would be the effect of radiation on people going to Mars, and would they be able to get back?
Well, thank you for asking a pointed question because my co-author on the book is a radiation medicine doctor. He was the director of Palomar Medical Center radiology. I have several radiology friends as my friends, and every single one of them who have seen the data that I've shown them from both from the Curiosity Mars rover and existing data tell me that we have incomplete data on what it does, but they assure me that it's a very critical problem. And works out of NASA radiology tell me that we will cook our astronauts during the flight, during interplanetary flight. Even forget getting to the surface, you will kill them. So radiation is a big, big problem. And this is why Gateway is essential for us to study how we can put people into deep space and over short periods of time get some data back. There are ethical problems with that because if you fly astronauts as guinea pigs, I think it is not right. So this is why I have been proposing the idea of an animal lab on Gateway. The idea that we would put, model animals like mice and so on, which is what we do every day on Earth, to study how they react, how biological and physiological changes happen in mammals. We can get some inkling through that. Thank you for asking. It's a very important question, right up top in the top rung of priorities.
So I want to open up to other questions. I know that there are a lot of them here.
Okay.
Well, if no one else is going to ask one, I'm going to ask one. Just quickly, Boca Chica. Why has Elon Musk gone to Texas and not to Cape Canaveral? What is the logic behind that?
Well, the Cape is run by the government, and they have strict regulations. Elon has access to some of the launch pads there, but he wanted better control over testing of the Starship. And as you know, he has been pranging like crazy, yeah, and he may do that for the next few rounds as well. You want to go on YouTube and see the evolution of the Starship. It tells you the cadence at which they are building. They are up to, I think, SN21 or something like that, and they are launching SN11, but the hardware for up to SN20 is already done. And they know and they anticipate what the next level of the exercise should be. And this is how real engineering is done, Neil. And you can only do so much with PowerPoint charts and Mathematica. At some point in time, the rubber hits the road, and that is when real engineering happens. In fact, architects play a role in this too, because many of those have to be signed off by an architect before you light the fire. So engineering is done in real time using real hardware, and it's a pleasure to see SpaceX do this. Every time a Starship falls to the ground, there is an applaud in mission control because they have gained the data they wanted in ultimate failure. In civil engineering, you will know that every single structure goes through what's called the ultimate load failure test. You push it to the limit, you go beyond the safety factor and factor of safety, see what happens, and then you make your evaluation. Bridges, we do that way, tall structures, we do that way. So that's how it is.
I have another follow-up question. Someone else is not going to ask one, but
okay.
Yeah, okay, I'll ask one. Let me ask one. Yes, so a while back, when I was involved in these things much more closely, there was a kind of a cultural shift where people were shifting from NASA to SpaceX because SpaceX was able to do things much more efficiently without all these kind of protocols and controls and things. And I guess so it's kind of short-circuiting things, but at the same time, SpaceX was really, it was kind of building up on top of NASA knowledge. I mean, it was really using that incredible experience that was coming in, and that's why, in many ways, they've got ahead. How has that changed? Is that still the same? That that SpaceX is building upon this thing and using that opportunity to do things much more quickly and with more risks and so on?
Yeah, you use the right term at the end. The risk factor has hobbled NASA in the past years. If you look at the aviation industry, there were the X vehicles. They built one after the other to test, to push the boundaries of flight, and NASA became risk averse to the point that tests took very long to do because they were afraid of failure. And this has had an impact, a tremendous impact in progress. So SpaceX finds it much easier to do these kinds of tests because they think failure is important to learning, and the only way to gain the data that they really need. I'm happy that it's happening now, and NASA uses SpaceX to do this because if NASA were to conduct a similar test as the Starship, it would be 100 times as expensive and maybe 1,000 times slower. So in a way, this kind of relegation of risk to the private industry is a good thing. But every time they do it, in the back of my mind, I too think the same way, Neil. Why did NASA do reusable spacecraft 50 years ago? Because there was no incentive to do it. Because the whole thing about space activity had to do with prestige and how much money can you throw at something. It was a way. It was a way to enter a very, very exclusive club of what you call spacefaring nations. And now all of a sudden we are finding that these technologies can be in the hands of private entrepreneurs. And I hope that answers your question.
No, absolutely. We have a couple of questions already in the chat. Eleanor has one, and then Marina again. So, Eleanor, would you like to ask your question?
Good morning.
Good morning.
My family a little bit relate to the space construction. My aunt, she was a lead engineer in Korolev Bureau. She was,
Okay.
yeah, she was working on satellite construction. And this is continuation to the previous conversation. I have a question. Private companies versus government, because before there was only space belong to the competition between Soviet Union and United States. And we still have this nostalgia moment uh, which we created, and was a big technological race, and we got so much from it. But now we have a lot of like entrepreneurs who getting into this race. And what about ethical questions? Because before it was belonged to the humanity, right? When it was chase between nations, but when the private entrepreneurs getting to the chase, how to control it? Because Elon Musk, he make announcement a few weeks ago about the Mars colony would not be belong to the earth and its own government, nobody controls. So it's raised a lot of like ethical questions. And also, what if there is like even bioorganism on those planets? What about again like
Yeah.
ethical questions to those organisms? And also another question, um, do we also care about our planet in this ideological race to colonize Mars? Because right now, in order to reach there, we need to change the engines from chemical reaction engines
Nuclear.
to like nuclear, right? And there is still like percentage of issue, I believe about 5% when unsuccessful launches. And if chemical engine have bigger boom, I mean, it's a problem, but not that drastic problem if it will happen with nuclear engine, which would be worse than Chernobyl. So just, I'm very curious about such ethical questions.
Yeah, you're rightly concerned, and I'm so happy to learn that there's an association with Korolev in your family. I've heard so many stories about him and the group around him, and how some of the projects evolved in those times. The Soviet Union was the undisputed leader in human spaceflight for some years. And um, I remember the time when Sputnik was launched. Korolev, it seems, went to see the spacecraft being prepared, and his primary concern at that time was how beautiful it looked. He made sure that the technicians managing the sphere polished it to the finest possible shine, because he said the whole world will be looking for it. Of course, it's too high to do this, but anyhow, the pride that goes with such technologies exists today. When you do the terrain relative navigation on Perseverance, that is exactly what goes into the design. You shine your eyes, the eyes of the camera, so well that there won't be a single speck on it when it opens its eyes and looks down to the surface of Mars. And the intricacy that goes into the design is very, very sophisticated. Um, with regard to ethics, yes, it is also a very high, in fact, the top rung of some of the things you mentioned. Um, Regarding nuclear flights, we know that we can do this safely. Rockets are going to get better. If you think 5% blow up, it's going to be 1% in the coming years. It's kind of like aviation in the early years. People died flying, rudimentary aircraft. We are much safer now, and we still break things once in a while and kill people. But we live with that. And in terms of nuclear ambitions, we have become very safe in the past a few years in how we handle nuclear materials. And for space missions in particular, The new design suggests that we do all our nuclear activities outside of planet Earth, not during liftoff. So a nuclear rocket would be built in orbit as opposed to being flown up from here. You may carry the fuel on a rocket, but you engage and light up an engine in high Earth orbit so that you'd be safe. And then at the end of the mission, which may be years, you would fly your vehicle to the sun to to the ultimate destruction of the vehicle. So things are being studied of that nature, and yesterday I engaged a space policy group, and I have the greatest ultimate respect for these people who deal with ethics of flight. I just mentioned this to Neil, that when you put people into spacecraft and put them into orbit around the moon to see how they fare in radiation, it is an ethical question. Can you do this? Is that how you test? Probably not. You do how we do this on Earth, and even there are ethical questions about why would you subject a primate or a mammal that is a living a living organism to something like that. And there is a school within the medical community that believes we can do these kinds of tests on specimens that are not living. And there's a great deal of debate going on. So that ethical back and forth, I think, will continue for a long time. And but if I look at the history of it, we will do these things because that's how our species is. I remember sitting next to Buzz one time, and there was this lecture on radiation from one of those people in Florida, whom I know very well. He laid it out like it is and said, "This is the reason why we cannot do deep space flight." And Buzz looks at me and says, "And still we will." And that's how we operate as a species. Neil will tell you that Edmund Hillary, I think, was asked why would you climb Mount Everest when you have beautiful mansions that you can go for a holiday in the UK, and he said, well, because it's there. It's a it's a human condition. So we will do these things in spite of the dangers, in spite of all the naysayers. Hope that gives you more questions than answers.
He was a Kiwi, right? He was a New Zealander.
Oh,
we have
right,
time
yeah.
for one more question before we have to switch off. So
Okay.
Marina has a quick question. Marina.
Yes, I don't know exactly if it's quick. I will try to make it quick. It's a little bit complex, my thought about this, but in a way, it's a little bit abstract. But I was thinking about, the architect's fascination again with all the space designs, and I was thinking how this because I finished my master in history as well, and I read a lot of books about, for example, how the history of the some space discoveries were related with technology or war technologies, and in a way, the relation with the ballistics, for example. And I was thinking, in a way, if maybe this, not exactly because it has to be in that way, but maybe if we can think that, in a way, this idea of projectile in terms of not exactly a missile, but yes, the logic behind, in terms of that we are projecting into the future in space and time, not only I mean in terms that we as architects, for example, we project things, so we throw things in space and time, and this is related with the same logic of the for example, war war technologies and also with space. And I was thinking that in that terms, what do you think that are these, because we were talking also about, for example, swarm intelligence with Neil in other classes, and in a way the space race is something that sometimes can be understood like swarm intelligence, in terms that there is a lot of disciplines and professions working together to do something, but at the same time there is behind all this the idea of competence and the idea, and also the idea of allies and enemies, and there is also present in all these disciplines. And I was thinking, like, in a way, if we can think this idea of projection with like something that we share, in terms that, for example, we architects, the study of digital architecture was related with these CAD systems, and you were talking about the blindness of the radar. But we use all these representations in architecture, and we also use the representation of the global, for example, and the representation of the trajectory of the missile to explain our designs, for example. So my question is, how do you think that there is this exchange between the disciplines of the design disciplines and engineers in terms of this kind of technologies that we use? I mean, how do you think that we work all together? And yeah, that will be my question.
In terms of projecting, I have always thought, Marina, that architects project visions much more credibly than any other profession, and that's why I hook myself to the architecture school. And in terms of really projecting our vision in the space industry, you may know that in the early 60s, there was a project called Project Cyclops, where we send out information into outer space using a radar, saying that, hey guys, we are here, come and see us, visit us. So that was a projection of our civilization and our yearnings to be. It's only in the past few years that Neil's friend, the black hole scientist, he said, hey, better not to publish anything because they're going to come over here and eat us up. So we don't want to have too many aliens hanging around. In terms of ideas like this, architects have already done very well explaining the future. When we do the future, what are we doing? We're projecting a missile into the future, and trying to see what grabs our attention. And it is the way our species works. I always thought that this particular idea of curiosity, wanting to know more, is a genetic construct. It is part of a survival construct within us that allows us to expand our sphere into the future. And it's healthy for us to maintain this whole thing of which space architecture is clearly a part, that is thinking about the future and visualizing it as a missile, as a missile towards change, towards progress. And many times, in fact, I tell my students that 99 and 100% times it's going to fail. And but don't worry about it. But that's the way we progress. We make ideas, we put them out, debate them, and you'll never know which idea grows legs. And it's fascinating, again, because you're a student of history. You probably know that technology has been used as a weapon in every war, and not only in physical wars, but information wars, in cultural wars. Technology has played a role. Abraham Lincoln used the telegraph to win the war, the Civil War. And he kept it a secret because he didn't want the enemy to use the telegraph as much. And then when they found out, he was using the railways because the railways were being laid, and it helped him. So technology is also a missile, and you use it to your advantage to win wars of different kinds. Not to mention our previous administration and all the problems that it had. So anyhow.
Yeah, and Madhu, this has been absolutely terrific. We're going to have to switch off our live stream now.
And I got to go to my next meeting too.
Yeah, okay. So thanks so much. We will be continuing. Okay, thank you, Madhu.
Okay, Neil. Good to see you. I hope you had your surfing this morning.
Well, not yet, but I will be.
Okay.
So, but Matthew, just maybe you can stay on for a second while I have some questions.
Okay.